In this video, we are going to continue our study of the 6th parak of Mesechus Bרכות, starting from Mishnah Dalet. Before we continue with Mishnah Dalet, we're just going to quickly review the basic structure of Mishnayos in general. As I'm sure you remember, there are basically 4 parts to a Mishnah. The first part is called the Mikra, the case, and that's what the Mishnah is trying to teach us about. The purpose of the Mishnayos are to teach us about what the rules are in specific cases. That leads us, we're going to highlight that in green. That leads us to the second part of Mishnayos, which are the din. What is the rule in those cases? We're going to highlight those in red. And as we know, many times there's a machlokas, an argument as to what the rule is in the case the Mishnah is presenting. Third part of the Mishnah is someone states what the rule in that case is. There's an opinion. So we're going to highlight that in blue. Sometimes the Mishnah tells us a specific rabbi, specific Tana, to attribute to that opinion. Other times it's anonymous, and when it's anonymous, we refer to them either as the Rabbanon, the rabbis, the Chachamim, another word for the rabbis, or the Tana Kama, the first Tana. They're all interchangeable. The last part of the Mishnayos is sometimes the Mishnah will give us a ta'am, a reason as to why that is the rule in this specific case. And so, let us continue with Mishnah Dalet. Sorry about that. So, the Mishnah gives us a case. Hayu lefanav minim harbe. If there were in front of him, minim harbe, many types. So, and since we're talking about which, if you remember from last Mishnah, we're talking about foods that get different types of bracha. So if you have different foods that get different brachos in front of you, so which one do you say first? So Rabbi Yehuda says, which one goes first? So the rule is, Im yesh beinehem shiva, if there are among the different types of foods, one of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, Shiva is 7, so the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, there are Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, has 7 special foods that have a special status. Those foods are chita, saora, rimon, gefen, te'ena, tamar, and zayit. I'll define those in a minute, but there are different types of foods. So mevarech alav, you make a bracha on them first. So those take precedence. Chachamim omrim, and the rabbis say, so they argue, mevarech aleiz men sheyirtzeh. You make a bracha on any of the ones that you want, meaning it's your choice. You don't have to make any specific bracha first, but rather it's whichever one you like the best. That's the one that you make the bracha on first. So, just to review, the Mishnah is discussing the order of brachos. That is their specific hierarchy of which brachos come first. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, yes, there is a hierarchy. The hierarchy is the zayin, meaning the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, which include chita, wheat, seora, barley, rimon, pomegranate, zayit, olive, te'ena, which is a fig, tamar, a date, and gefen, grapes. These are based on psukim in the Torah. These special fruits of Eretz Yisrael, they take precedence. You make a bracha on them first. The Chachamim argue and say, whichever one you like best, that's the one you make the bracha on first. Next Mishnah, Mishnah Hey. We're going to have a little bit of a different topic in this Mishnah. So here we go. The first case, Beirach al hayayin shelifnei hamazon. So the case is the following: Beirach al hayayin, if you make a bracha on wine shelifnei hamazon, that comes before the meal. It used to be the practice, we still do this on Shabbos, that you would drink a cup of wine before you have your meal. So do you have to make a bracha on subsequent cups of wine that you may have during the meal or at the end of the meal? So the rule is, the Mishnah says, Patar es hayayin shel achar hamazon. So the bracha that you made on the wine at the beginning of the meal, patar. Patar means to exempt. Patar exempts the wine Shila'achar mazon, that comes after the meal, meaning either the wine that you're going to use to bench. The practice is, you may have seen it sometimes, to when you bench, when you say Bרכות Hamazon, to do it by raising a cup of wine. So it includes that wine, and it includes all cups of wine during the meal. So you don't need to make a special bracha on wine for each cup of wine. Next case, Berach ala parperes shelifnei hamazon. If you make a bracha on the parperes is an appetizer, shelifnei hamazon, that comes before the meal. As you know, an appetizer is something to whet your appetite. So this could be fish, it could be a plate of meatballs, but it's something that comes before you actually have the main course to whet your appetite. So the rule is, in this case, patar es parperes shela'achar hamazon. So the bracha that you make on this appetizer exempts you from making an additional bracha on any other appetizers that may come after the main course of the meal. And I think it's important to add just at this point, I should have mentioned it at the beginning, but I think it's still true today, and we're going to see this in the next Mishnah, but the main staple of life back then was bread. Bread was considered the main part of the meal. So this was generally food that was brought out before you brought the bread or whatever you were eating with the bread. Next case, Berach al hapas. So if you made a bracha on bread, again, pas or pat if you're Israeli, so that's the same thing as pita, so bread. Berach al hapas, in the next case, if you make a bracha, a blessing on the bread, so the rule is patar es parperes. You exempt the appetizer that would follow after the bread from making a bracha on that appetizer. So, for example, if you wash and have a piece of challah, a piece of bread, you do not need to make another bracha on, let's say, fish that you would have after the bread, which is what many people do Friday night. They have bread and then they have either a fish or a soup. You don't make a new bracha on that. Those are parperes, those are appetizers, so the bread exempts those foods. The opposite, though, a la parperes, if you make the bracha on the appetizer, so let's say you had the appetizer first, and then you decide to wash. So lo patar es hapas. You do not exempt the bracha from making a bracha. You're not exempt from making a bracha on the bread. So let's say you have your fish, and then you decide, you know what, I want to wash, and I want to have a piece of bread. So even though you're still in the same meal, you need to still go ahead, wash, and make a new bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz on the bread. Beis Shammai omrim, the house of Shammai says, Beis Shammai, the house of Shammai means the students of Shammai. It was one of two major schools of study at the time. So the house of Shammai says, Af lo ma'aseh kedera. In addition to this, even lo ma'aseh kedera, also not a something that's cooked in a pot. So for example, a porridge or a soup. So anything that's substantial that may be considered like bread, that it's more of the main part of the meal. So Beis Shammai says the parperes, if you make a bracha on the appetizer, you also need to make a new bracha on the what's called a ma'aseh kedera, some sort of dish that is made in a pot, so possibly a soup or a porridge or that type of food. So to review, this is what we have so far. So brachos, the Mishnah Daled discusses the following case: brachos that are exempt making more brachos. That's the general theme of this Mishnah. So we said first, if you have wine before the meal, so we exempt all additional cups of wine during the meal. Next, if you have, second case, appetizer before the meal. If you have an appetizer before the meal, you make a bracha on it, so it exempts any appetizers that follow during the meal. You do not need to make a new appetizer on additional, a new bracha on additional appetizers, even though the bracha that you made on the first appetizer was before the meal, so you might think they should not be counted as one sitting down and eating. However, we found out that the bracha on the appetizer does not exempt bread, and according to Beis Shammai, it also does not exempt something cooked in a pot, a maseh kedera. Third case is bread. If you make a bracha on bread, so that exempts the appetizers. You do not need to make a new bracha on any appetizers. Next Mishnah, we're actually going to skip, we just did Mishnah Hey, we're actually going to skip to Mishnah Zayin because they are related, and then after we do Mishnah Zayin, we're going to come back to Mishnah Vav. So, Mishnah Zayin starts the following way. Hevi lefanov maliach batchila upas imo. So, hevi lefanov, if they brought before him maliach. Maliach is a salted food, a very salty food. Batchila, at the beginning of the meal. Upas imo, and there's bread with this salted food. Now, the only reason you're having the bread is because the food is very salty. So you don't really want to eat the bread for the bread's sake. It's only in order for you to be able to eat this salty food. So the rule in this case is mevarech ala maliach. You make a bracha on the salty food, which is probably going to be either shahakol or ha'adama, depending on what it is. Upoter es apas. And this bracha of shahakol, for argument's sake, on the salty food, exempts a bracha on the bread. That's very strange. We said in the previous Mishnah that a parperes, an appetizer, does not exempt the bracha on the bread. So the Mishnah is going to give us a reason, as we discussed before, sometimes it gives us a reason, as to why, in this case, in the case of the maliach, the very salty food, it's different, and the bracha on the maliach exempts the one from making a bracha on the bread. So what's the reason? Shehapas tefela lo. Because the pas, the bread, is tefela lo, is secondary to it. As we mentioned before, the only reason why you're eating bread now is because the food is too salty to eat on its own. You don't want to eat the bread. If the salty food wasn't there, you wouldn't be eating the bread. So it shows that the bread is not part of your meal, it's only secondary, and therefore you only make a bracha on the salty food. Now the Mishnah is going to tell you where it got that idea from, and that you can apply that idea to other cases. So we're going to have a kind of a koteres, a title. Zeh haklal. This is the rule. This is the general rule. So we'll mark that as in black box as a title. Kol shu ikar v'imo tefela. Any case, green. So we're talking about a case or a general case. Kol shu ikar. Anything that is ikar is the essential, the main part. The imo tefela, and with it is a secondary part. So what is that? So for example, in our case, the main food is the salty dish, and the tefela, the secondary part of this is the bread. The main part you're eating is the bread, is the salty food. So what do you do in such a case? The rule is mevarech ala ikar upoter es hatefela. So you make a bracha on the ikar, you make a bracha on the essential, the main part, the main food, upoter es hatefela, and that bracha exempts a second bracha on the secondary part. So this is very relevant. For example, I'm sure you'll discuss it more this year, but let's say a bowl of cereal. So for many people, there's two brachos there, right? Let's say you have cinnamon toast crunch, the taste you can see. That's mizonos. But you pour milk into it. Milk is shahakol. So do you make two brachos? So it's a discussion, but potentially, since the main part is the mizonos, the cinnamon toast crunch, you would only make a mizonos, and that would exempt you from making a bracha on the milk, the shahakol on the milk, because the only reason you're having the milk is to eat your bowl of cereal of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And so we see, you look at the arrow, this klal, this general rule, explains is the source for this reason that we gave as to why, in the case of the salty food, you don't make a bracha on the bread. The bracha on the salty food exempts the exempts the bracha on the bread. So if we go back to our chart here, we're going to actually reveal now what you were probably very confused about, and get rid of these smiley faces. That the Mishnah Zayin is related to Mishnah Hey, because it reveals another rule about when a bracha on one type of food exempts a bracha on another food. So the case here is, in Mishnah Zayin, if you have a salty food with bread, and again, the bread is just so that you can eat the salty food because it's too salty by itself. So the bracha on the salty food, for argument's sake, sha'akol, exempts the bracha on the bread, exempts you from having to make hamotzi lechem minaretz on the bread. And the reason for this is this general rule that the Mishnah tells us is that whenever you have two food types, one is ikar, one is the main food, and one is tafel, one is secondary, like the milk and cereal, for example. So you only make one bracha, you make a bracha on the ikar, the main food, but not on the tafel, not on the secondary food. And this rule, by the way, really explains the previous Mishnah as to why a bracha on bread could exempt appetizers. I'll let you think about that on your own. So this rule actually can explain the previous Mishnah. Okay, and with that we move on to Mishnah Vav. Now, as we said, we're going back a Mishnah because this is a new topic. What we've been talking about in the previous Mishnah is, number one, different food types get different brachos and what those brachos are. Number two, let's say you make a mistake and say the wrong bracha, which bracha counts. Number three, once you do make a bracha on one thing, there are certain situations where that bracha on one food item can exempt you from making a second bracha on a second food item. This Mishnah Vav is going to discuss a fourth topic about making brachos on food, is who needs to make a bracha. So the first case in our Mishnah is as follows. Hayu yoshvin le'echol, if you sit down to eat. So kol echad ve'echad mivarech le'atzmo. So every individual needs to make a blessing for himself. Now, when we say yoshev, we mean, for example, sitting down in the cafeteria, where it's not clear that you are having a meal together. You just happen to all be sitting down in the same place. Yoshev means to sit. Now, as we're going to see, this is in contrast with the next case. In order to understand the next case, we need a picture first. It used to be the practice of when people sat down to eat, they didn't sit in chairs like we do, but rather they did something like this. They leaned on some sort of sofa couch and they would eat together, and there would be servants and they would serve them food. This leaning, you might know from Pesach, is called heseba, to recline. And this is the way that they, especially royalty, ate in large groups. So you have another picture here. So reclining indicates that there's a lot of people coming together specifically to eat food together. And with that understanding, we can continue to the next case of the Mishnah. So Heisebu, if a bunch of people recline together, meaning that they're coming together to have a meal together, so then echad mevarech lekulan. So then one person out of the group can make a bracha, can make the first bracha for everyone. So we do this, for example, on Shabbos, when we wash and we sit down and we have hamot and we make hamotzi on the bread. So everyone doesn't make their own hamotzi, but the standard practice is that the father of the house or whoever will make a bracha on the bread, and he'll say Mosdech V'Nart, and then give out the pieces of bread to everyone enjoying in the meal together. Next case. Let's say there was brought to them wine during the meal. Mazon is the meal. Ba means to come. Yayin is wine. Besoch is during. So Ba'alem yayin besoch hamazon. So the wine was brought to them in the middle of their meal. So everyone's eating and the waiters bring wine. So the general rule is that wine, depending on what type of wine is, you might need to make a new bracha for the wine, or even though you said hamotzi. So, does everyone need to make their own bracha? So the Mishnah says the rule is kol echad ve'echad mivarech la'atma. Every individual needs to make their own bracha on the wine. Even though we just said that when they're all dining together, reclining, eating their omelets together, one person can make the bracha for everyone, and everyone answers amen. Wine in the middle of the meal is different. The reason being is because everyone's eating, and when, especially if you watch someone else eating, people get very focused when they eat, and they don't really pay attention to other things. You might know someone who's like that. So therefore, if one person makes the bracha, we're concerned that the other people are not actually paying attention and listening. Rather, they're focused on their own plate, their own food. Therefore, you don't make. Each individual needs to make their own bracha. It's not sufficient for one person to make the bracha for everyone else. But with that logic, the next case makes sense. La'achar mazon, but after the meal, meaning it's a continuation of the previous case. So we said if wine comes before the meal, wine comes during the meal, then each person needs to make their own bracha. But if the wine is brought after the meal, people are not involved in their plates anymore. They finished, and they have wine either to clear their palate, or they're benching, or whatever. So echad mivarech lekulam. So it is sufficient for one person to make the bracha on the wine for all of them, and they can all answer amen, and then they can all drink their wine because they're not busy and focused on their plates because they already ate it. So now the next case is a little tricky because the case is kind of embedded in the rule. So al ha-mugmar. So we're going to do this a little bit out of order. Al ha-mugmar. On mugmar. Now mugmar is some sort of spice. It used to be the practice to, at the end of a meal, the waiters would bring some sort of spice, probably similar to hookah, and everyone would smell it, and it would make them feel good, and it helped them digest their food, and something like that. So there is a bracha actually that you make on this. We'll call it hookah, for argument's sake. Borei minei b'samim. The God creates good smelling things. So we say borei minei b'samim or borei atzei b'samim on what we call b'samim, which we use at Havdalah. But there are many other things. Whenever you smell something nice, you should say the bracha borei minei b'samim, depending on if it's a type of spice or if it's a type of branch, would depend on what bracha it is. But either way, that was the practice. So they bring this after the meal. So we just said that if they bring wine at the end of the meal, so one individual is honored, so to speak, to make the bracha for everyone, and everyone answers amen. Kind of like we honor someone to say to bench at the end of the meal, to lead what we call the mezuman, inviting everyone to bench together. So that person who got who was honored to make the bracha on the wine, he too, Vehu Omer, he says al hamugmar. He says the bracha of Borei Minei B'samim on this mugmar, on this hookah stuff. Now, even though it's not really connected to the meal, afal pi shein mevin es hamugmar el achar suda. Even though you don't bring the mugmar, the hookah, until after the meal is over. Even though it's not part of the meal, since he was honored already with the making the bracha on the wine at the end of the meal, he's also honored with making the bracha of everyone on the hookah. I just want to make a disclaimer: you should not smoke hookah. This is not what this video is saying. I just want to make that perfectly clear. It's not a good thing to do. But just for teaching's sake, that's the best. That's the best synonym I could think of. Mugmar. You could also, if you have a very old Yiddish grandparent, you can ask them about snuff boxes. That was also pretty popular, like 100 years ago, even more recent than that. But yeah, that is the rule in this Mishnah. Okay, and with that we move on to the final Mishnah in the Perek, Mishnah Ches. Now, if you've been paying attention, we've been kind of progressing along the meal. We started with the bracha you say before the meal, then we talked about stuff that happens during the meal. The last Mishnah talked about stuff that happens towards the end of the meal. And the final part of your meal should be bracha achrona, the bracha that you say after you've eaten the good food of God, and to thank God for giving you wonderful food. So, what is the bracha? That's what this Mishnah is going to discuss. So the first case in the Mishnah is the following. Achal te'enim anavim v'rimonim. If you ate te'enim, or if you remember from the previous part of the video, te'enim are figs, anavim are grapes, v'rimonim are pomegranates. So these are examples of what we call the shiva minim, the 7 fruits. So if you eat any of the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, since they have this higher status, so the rule is mivarech acharein shalosh brachos. You bless after them shalosh brachos, 3 brachos, and this is the opinion on Divrei Rabban Gamliel. This is the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. We're going to explain what shalosh brachos are in a second. The Chachamim say, they argue, bracha achas me'ein shalosh. You make 1 bracha me'ein shalosh. That is similar to 3. So, what is bracha, the 3 brachos and the similar to 3 brachos? So the 3 brachos is what we call birchas hamazon, benching, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The reason why it's called 3 brachos is because originally the text contained 3 brachos. Me'ein shalosh, the bracha that we say after different types of food that is similar to the 3 brachos is what we call al hamichya. But you'll notice, right, after you eat mizonos, if you eat a cookie, you say the bracha of al hamichya. Now, there's a second version for the shiva minim, ala eitz v'al priya eitz, and there's a special version for wine. We'll learn about more about that later. But it's me'ein shalosh because it's like a short version of the 3 brachos that consist of benching. So there is a machlokas between Rabban Gamliel and the Chachamim as to what bracha you say after one of the shiva minim, the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva says, afilu achal shelek v'hu mizono. So he adds another case. Afilu, even achal shelek, if he ate a shelek is a cooked vegetable dish, which is normally not considered a staple, but v'hu mizono, but that is what he makes his meal out of, so that's kind of relevant today. Because many times we don't eat as much bread as they used to. We can go to Citron and Rose and not have to wash and get the steak, and the steak is the main part of the meal, not the bread. But so if that, according to Rabbi Akiva, if that becomes your meal, even if it's not one of the Zion minim, not the Shiva minim, so then the rule is mavarech acharav shalosh brachos. You also bench after that dish, even after the citron and roast steak or some cooked vegetable dish. That's what you make your meal out of, and you have to make the 3 brachos. Next case, this is kind of completely separate from the theme of this Mishnah. This is just thrown in at the end, kind of. So hashos mayim litzma'o. So if you drink water, but the Mishnah is very specific here, litzma'o, in order to quench his thirst. So sometimes we drink water to take a pill, That's not what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is talking about specifically where you're drinking water because you want to drink water. So what's the bracha on water? So you think it's obvious, but it's actually a machlokes. So the first opinion is what you probably expect. Omer sha'akol niyeh b'dvaro. So you make the bracha of sha'akol niyeh b'dvaro, that everything is in existence by means of His word, by the word of God, which is very simple because God created water and it doesn't grow from the ground. Therefore, you say sha'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Makes sense. That's the default bracha. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, but Rabbi Tarfon says the rule is borei nefashos rabos, that you make before you say sha'akol the bracha of borei nefashos rabos, that God creates many souls. Now that's very perplexing because most of us know that is actually the bracha that we make after one says sha'akol. That for any food that you say sha'akol, the bracha achrona, the after bracha is what we call borei nefashos rabos. So what Rabbi Tarfon was talking about, you have to stay tuned, hopefully till sometime next year. But that is the machlokas about the bracha that you make before drinking water. So just to review, the Mishnah, the final Mishnah, discusses two topics. First, what we'd expect. What we'd expect. Bracha achrona. What bracha do you make after eating? So, first, if it's one of the Zayin meaning, it's one of the Shiva meaning, the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, which we discussed previously what they are. So there's a machlokes. Rabban Gamliel says that you bench on them, that you make Birkat HaMazon, the 3 brachos. Chachamim, the rabbis argue and say, no, you say Me'ein Shosh, the bracha which we are familiar as Al HaMichya, or for, depending on what it would be, Al HaMichya or Al HaGefen or Al HaEitz, whatever version, depending on what food you're eating, you say that bracha afterwards, and that's the accepted opinion. That's what we do. Second Mishnah, that second case is, let's say a cooked veggie dish is what you make your meal out of, even though it's not bread, because as we stated before, the normal staple of life, the normal thing to make a meal out of was bread. So Rabbi Akiva says that you bench on that you make Birkat HaMazon, you say the 3 brachos on that, because that's considered your meal. Then the Mishnah throws in a random case of what's the bracha on water, and specifically water to quench your thirst, not to, for example, swallow a pill. So the Rabbanon the rabbis say that you make sha'akol, which is what we expect. Rabbi Tarfon comes out of nowhere and says that you say borei nefashos on water. That every time you want to drink of water out of the water fountain, Rabbi Tarfon would say borei nefashos rabos v'chatzonan al kol ma she'basal da'chayos ben vesh kol chay baruch chayolami. And so those are the mishnayos that you need to learn and know extremely well before you come to school on August 28th or whenever school starts. Thank you for watching, and we are looking forward to your return to KYHS High School. And if you are an incoming 9th grader, then we are very excited to get the chance to learn with you next year and for you to become part of the Kohelet Yeshiva family. Have a wonderful summer.